car's been running for approximately 10 minutes with the AC on. You can see that it's set on low on both sides and the AC is turned on. Now, the air coming from the vent is 24.6 degrees, so that's even warmer than the air inside the shop. Hi everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of Diagnose Dan. Today we're working on a 2021 Cupra Formentor, and it's very, very hot outside, but the AC in this vehicle is not working. It's already been to an AC specialist, but apparently it's not something simple. So let's see if we can diagnose this one together. Let me tell you exactly what I've learned about this vehicle so far. So the story is, the AC in this car isn't working and the customer brought it to an AC specialist. That AC specialist took a look and apparently there was something wrong with the AC pressure or the pressure reading. So they thought maybe it was low on charge. So they serviced the system, but they only had to add like 15 grams. So that wasn't the issue. Then they took another look and did some measurements and decided to replace the pressure sensor twice. So they replaced the AC pressure sensor on this car twice. Then they did some other measurements because it still wasn't working. And after a few hours, they gave up, called me, and asked us to have a look. So that's where we are right now. So let's start out by confirming the customer complaint. It's going to be a hot day today, but in the shop, it's still relatively cool because it's still early. And in the shop right now, it's 23.5 degrees. The car's been running for approximately 10 minutes with the AC on. You can see that it's set on low on both sides and the AC is turned on. Now, the air coming from the vent is 24.6 degrees, so that's even warmer than the air inside the shop. So that's customer complaint confirmed. This AC isn't doing anything. I hooked up the vehicle to a battery charger so we don't have to worry about battery voltage. Now, I don't think I mentioned this before, but this vehicle is a hybrid and the compressor is a high voltage electric compressor. We can see the high voltage cable running up to the compressor right there, and the compressor itself is buried somewhere down there. We can hardly see it, but believe me, it's there. Now, this is something we need to be aware of. If at any point during this diagnosis we have to work on any of the high voltage components, we need to make sure we power down the high voltage first before ever touching one of those components. We've learned what the customer complaint is. We have confirmed the customer complaint. The AC isn't working. So in the next step, we have scanned the vehicle for fault codes. And we are lucky because there is a fault code stored in the AC system. And we've got the B10 AE31 high pressure sensor, no signal. Before we do anything else, we first need to make sure that this isn't a common issue on this model. And we can do this very easily by entering that fault code in DDTSB. Now, I already pre-selected the vehicle. So let's go to bulletins. And it tells us we need to be careful because it's a high voltage vehicle. And we can enter the fault code right here. And the fault code we have got is the B10 AE31. Let's hit enter. And we have got a hit. Let's open that bulletin. And it tells us that the most likely cause for this fault code on this model is a faulty pressure sensor. Now, unfortunately, it can't be that because that has already been replaced on this vehicle, but it can also be a fault in the LIN bus signal or the incorrect amount of refrigerant. Now, it can't be that either because that has been checked. Now, it doesn't tell us to replace that sensor. It first tells us to do some checks. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, the pressure sensor on this vehicle lives right here. It's quite easily accessible. Now, it has already been replaced twice, so it can't be the sensor. It can't be low on refrigerant because that has been checked. So it must be something in the wiring. So in the next step, let's do some measurements. Before we can do any measurements, we need to look up a wiring diagram because we need to know what to measure and where to measure it. So I already looked up a wiring diagram in ALLDATA. I pre-selected the vehicle, I pre-selected the system, and I found the diagram for the pressure sensor. So the next step, let's take a closer look at that wiring diagram. This is the wiring diagram for our refrigerant pressure sensor. We can see it's a 3-wire sensor. The brown wire says GND, and that means that is a ground. Next to that, we've got a violet blue wire, and that says LIN. So this wire is our LIN signal, and that means there's one wire left. It's black and blue, and that means that wire is our power supply. Let's make sure we've got the correct wiring diagram, and indeed we have got a brown wire. So this is our ground, and we have got a violet with blue wire, so that's our LIN signal, and this is a black wire with a blue tracer, so that's our power feed. So in the next step, let's do some measurements. I hooked up my test light to battery positive, so when I touch a ground, my test light is going to light up. Now I back probe that brown wire, so when I touch that wire right there, my test light is supposed to light up, and it does. So that means our ground is confirmed. So there's no problem with our ground wire. Now let's switch that probe to the power feed. I switched that probe to the black and blue wire, which is supposed to be our power feed. Now I hooked up my test light to battery negative. So when I touch a power feed, my test light is going to light up. Now let's check the power coming to that sensor. It's a 12-volt power. And let me turn off this light. As you can see, the test light lights up. So in this stage, we've got power and ground to that sensor confirmed. We check the power and we check the ground to that sensor. So the last thing we need to check is a LIN signal, and we're going to do that using our oscilloscope. I back probed the LIN wire on that connector, and I disconnected the connector from that sensor. So when we look at our oscilloscope and we see a waveform, we know that the waveform makes it all the way to that sensor. Now I hooked up the scope, and I'm actually pretty amazed, but the signal making it to the sensor actually looks like a decent LIN signal. So that means we've got a power at that sensor, we have got a ground at the sensor, and we have got a signal at that sensor, but still the AC control unit is not able to communicate with that sensor. So the auto shop might be right, this might not be straightforward, and this might become a pretty interesting case. We got power, ground, and a signal at the sensor, but still we have got a fault code stored that we can't communicate with the sensor. Now the sensor isn't just a dumb on-off switch, it is a smart sensor that converts an analog signal into a digital signal and then sends it to the control unit. Now the control unit is saying, I'm not receiving that signal. And I just went into live data and I looked at the data pit for the refrigerant pressure, and I'm not getting a value, but I'm getting a few dots. So there's definitely something weird going on with that signal. Now I don't know if it's going to help us, but it's kind of cool to do. But in the next step, I'm going to do something that's called serial decoding. We already hooked the Pico up to that LIN signal, but we can actually make the Pico decode those signals and tell us who is sending it and if the message makes any sense. So let's do that in the next step, and let's take a look at that waveform again. We're still hooked up to the LIN bus signal, and right now the Pico is catching that signal. But at the same time, it's decoding the signal and telling us if those messages make any sense. When we're doing serial decoding, we just see a bunch of numbers shooting up the screen. It's not until we pause the screen that we can see some interesting stuff. Now I just reviewed the footage and I paused the screen a total of 3 times, and I recognized a pattern. Every time I paused the screen, I saw that identifier 24 was sending an invalid message. Now everything on the network has got its own number, and every time 24 came by, the message was invalid. Now it's not abnormal to see invalid messages, but usually that can be a glitch, and the next time that identifier comes by, the message is valid. Or the car can be equipped with something that is not equipped on this car, and sometimes the masker asks about it. That's pretty normal, but in this case, identifier 24 is coming by so many times, and every time that message is invalid, that I got a hunch and I got a feeling, and I can't be sure, but I got a feeling that number 24 is our AC pressure sensor. Now that was pretty cool, but we actually didn't learn anything we already knew. We already knew we couldn't communicate with that sensor. Now in the next step, I want to remove that sensor to have a closer look at it. So let's remove the sensor. Now there's a Schrader valve in there, so we actually don't have to worry about the refrigerant coming out. Now it's 24 mil, so let's remove it. Now this one is not that hard to reach. And there it comes, and we got it out. I took a closer look at the sensor, and it is a genuine sensor. I thought maybe they had used an aftermarket sensor that didn't work correctly, but it is an original sensor. Now it's basically very simple. We know that we have a clean lens signal up until this sensor with the connector disconnected. We can't talk to everything else on the lens network. So either there's something wrong with the sensor, or there's something inside our control unit that makes it suddenly not be able to communicate with the sensor anymore. Now, that's far-fetched, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check out the sensor, do some research, make sure it's the right one. If that checks out, we have to dig a little deeper. I did some research on the sensor, and I entered this VIN number into the parts catalog. I looked up this part, and you have to understand there is a very long part number or part code on the sensor, and it's very small. I can't even read it right now without my glasses. But I think it's 9 or 10 letters and numbers, and 3 out of those letters and numbers are different according to the parts catalog. Now, I don't know if that means that this is the wrong sensor. I mean, sometimes numbers change and sometimes parts are superseded. Now, at this point, I just can't ignore it. They have replaced it twice. I called the air conditioning specialist. They said they replaced it with the exact same number as they got out of the vehicle, but they've got that sensor right now and I cannot check it at this moment. But at this point, I just cannot ignore it, and I can't be sure because it's replaced twice. Now, I have to say, chances are slim because this is OE, but the numbers are different. Now, the part is on stock. The dealership is only 15 minutes away, and it's relatively cheap. So I'm quickly going to fetch another sensor. We're going to install it, and we're going to see if anything changes. I've got the new sensor from the dealership, and when you compare the old new sensor and the new sensor side by side, you can see that they're physically different. You can see on this sensor there is a cutout over here, which is missing over there, and you can see that the print is very clear on this sensor, and you can hardly read the print on this one. Now, does it mean anything? I don't know. We're going to install the new one, and we're going to see if anything changes. I installed the new sensor. This is the old one, and right now we are decoding the messages on the bus again. Now let's review the footage and let's see if anything changed. I took some screenshots of the serial decoding and I put them up the screen for you guys to see. When we look at identifier 24 with the new sensor installed, we can see it's now sending a valid message. So hopefully that message is coming from that pressure sensor. So the next step, we're going to take a scan tool and we're going to see if that fault code is now gone. I quickly cleared all the fault codes. Obviously, there were still fault codes stored from before. But right now, we're in the AC, and as you can see, there are no more fault codes stored. So that looks promising. Now let's go into the live data, and let's go to the pressure sensor. And as you can see, right now, we have got a reading. So that looks even more promising. Let's go inside the car and let's see if we can get some cold air out of those vents. The car's been running for approximately 5 minutes. The temperature in the shop right now is 26 degrees and rising. It's going to be in the 30s today. The AC is turned on low on both sides, and it's on. You can see it. And the temperature coming from the vents right now is a nice and comfortable 4 degrees. And I can tell you, a polar bear would love it. This car is nice and cool again, and it can return to the customer. Now, apparently this sensor was replaced multiple times and it didn't fix the vehicle, and that shows us that we have to doubt everything. Now, what are your thoughts on the sensor? Is it broken? Is it the wrong number? Or is it a fake? Because that's something that we see happening a lot these days. I don't know. What I do know is that after we replaced it, everything works absolutely brilliant again. Now, remember the bulletin in the beginning of this video? It told us that the most likely cause for this failure on this vehicle, on this particular model, is this sensor. Now, at the time, I didn't think so, but eventually, that bulletin was right. Ain't that cool? Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel. And when you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I upload a new video. And remember, diagnose then, fixed it again. See you next time, guys. And then they did a lot of measurements. And apparently there was a problem with the AC. We've confirmed it. So in the next step, we're going to scan into a digital analog pressure into a digital sensor. It is a smart sensor that converts the pressure into a digital signal. This is a smart sensor that converts an analog signal into a digital signal. We can actually take a closer look. Now, I just we can actually take a closer look. Now, already check mark, or it's a cross that the message is invalid. You know, numbers change or they're superseded.